Okay, so in the last lecture we looked at Aristotle's criteria for a flourishing life, and we also looked at some candidates that he thinks the common people often offer up that he thinks are not going to meet these criteria that fail in various ways. So, what is Aristotle? If the answers that people or many people commonly give are bad, what is Aristotle's own answer? Well, Aristotle thinks that a flourishing life is one of virtuous activity. You develop certain good traits of character, courage, generosity, justice, proper pride, good temper. We'll go through all of these in more detail. And you have a life where you can put these activities into practice. You can do courageous or just or generous or, um, well, blanking on other virtues, properly ambitious things, right? You develop these virtues, then you have a chance to put them into practice. Aristotle will say that is the flourishing or good human life. Well, to evaluate this, let's go back and look at Aristotle's own criteria for a flourishing life. So remember, it has to be worth pursuing for its own sake, complete or lacking nothing, worth wanting, and not easily lost or taken away. Let's see how it does on these criteria. Is a life of virtuous activity worth pursuing for its own sake? Is it good in itself? I think it's quite plausible to say yes, right? If I ask you why you did something, and you say, well, because it was just, or because it was generous, or because it was brave, that seems a pretty good answer to my question. It seems weird to say, well, why do you want to do brave things? Why do you want to do generous things, right? Virtuous activity, does seem worth pursuing for its own sake. Now I'm going to skip 2 for the time being and come back to it. Complete or lacking nothing. That's going to be the hardest of these for Aristotle to show his meats, so we'll save it for last. But let's look at 3, not easily lost or taken away. Is a life of virtuous activity hard to take away or lose? Well, yeah, right? You can lose money because the stock market crashes because you have a bit of bad luck. It is very easy to lose money. You can lose fame. If you do something bad, like Lance Armstrong did, but you can also lose fame for dumb reasons. Maybe you just go out of style, right? So, or you're an athlete, you lose a game through no fault of your own or something, right? Well, is it equally easy? Pleasure, again, that's what we could argue about, but it also does seem easy to lose pleasure. Bad things happen and suddenly you're not feeling so pleasant anymore, right? Is a life of virtuous activity as easy to take away or lose? No. Is it hard to lose? I think most of us would say that it is, right? You don't become a coward when you were once brave because some random bad thing happens to you. You don't become stingy when you were once generous overnight because of some bit of bad luck, right? And I think we could argue that not only is it hard to lose, but it's up to us whether we do lose it, right? We have a choice about whether to act bravely or generously in a way that we don't about whether to have money or not, right? We can only lose the life of virtuous activity, one might claim, if we make a bad choice. It's up to us then, or at least it is to a large degree. In that case, then, if that's true, it is not easy to lose. It is hard to take away. It meets criteria 3. But let's think about 2. Is a life of virtuous activity complete or lacking nothing worth wanting? Well, now Aristotle is not going to say that being virtuous is all that matters and it gets you everything you might want in life. What he does say, and I think for a lot of things this is fairly plausible, is that if you are virtuous and you live a life of virtuous activity, it is very likely to get you the other things that are valuable in life, right? If you are a kind, generous, just person, are you likely to have friends who really care about you? Yes. Are you likely to have good relations with your family and your children? Yes. Are you likely to accomplish things that legitimately you should be proud of? Also, yes, right? And the virtues are very much things that help you do this, right? If you are a just, generous person, that it helps you, that in fact enables you to have good relations with other people. If you are brave or self-controlled, that helps you to accomplish great things, right? So virtue is good in itself, but it also, by its nature, leads to the other things that it makes sense to want in life. I don't think that's crazy. But there is a challenge here, or there seems to be, when it comes to pleasure. Remember, Aristotle himself admits pleasure is worth wanting for its own sake. A good life will, on the whole, be a pleasant one. It makes sense to want pleasure. Well, but then the question is it always pleasurable to act well? Is a life of virtuous activity going to be a pleasant one? Will a person who does what morality asks of him or her have the most pleasant life, or even a pleasant one? Well, it might not seem that way, right? It is not always pleasant. In fact, it is often unpleasant, we might think, to be moral. Let's just take two. We haven't really talked about Aristotle's list of virtues in any detail. I've thrown some random ones out. But let's just talk about two virtues and, whether it's pleasant to be courageous or generous. Take generosity. You might help another person, or you might give them money because you feel like you have to. You might listen to a lecture on Peter Singer like I gave earlier in the semester, and all the need half a world away and feel guilty and give some money. But a lot of times it makes perfect sense to say that it seems like it's not fun being so generous. You might even say, I wish I wasn't so generous because it's unpleasant having to give my money away when I would like to spend it on myself. You might say the same thing about courage and facing danger, right? You might stand up to somebody because you see they're doing something bad, but you might the whole time be like just terrified, and you might think to yourself, God, I wish I wasn't so brave. I wish I could have just turned my back and walked away and didn't have to deal with this. My life would be much more pleasant if I weren't so courageous, right? Or something like that, right? So this seems to be a legitimate challenge for Aristotle, and I do think he has things to say about this, but I think we need to appreciate the challenge itself, and that's where we'll pick up next lecture.